Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. As you may know, I have been studying for the Certified Professional in Talent Development examination, which I hope to take sometime in September. I have been posting my notes to my personal webpage, craigingstrom.ninja/CPTD, link in the description. But I came across 3 articles that I thought I would share and talk a little bit about in this video because they are kind of unique. So let's go ahead and get started. So the 3 articles that I'm talking about are the communication skills of an effective trainer. This is actually in a handbook, so you might not have access to this chapter, so I want to just highlight a few things from it. The second is actually a TD at Work article. I think is published in 2004. In any case, it is Agile and LLAMA for ISD project management. So I thought that this really kind of covered a lot of the terrain of a variety of topics that are covered in the personal capability. And 3, the nominal group technique, applications for training needs assessment, somewhat of a dated article, but I really like the idea of a facilitation technique being applied to needs assessment. So let's go ahead and talk about the first one, the communication skills of an effective trainer. But before I get started on that, I just want to give a shout out to Mohamed, or Mo, I believe he goes by. On his LinkedIn, he is sharing some really cool infographics that cover actually, for example, in this particular one I'm showing on the screen, the LLAMA approach as an ISD approach. So check out his URL, which is in the description. It'll take you to his LinkedIn page. Follow him. He's a great resource, I think, if you're studying for the CPTD, and just has these really beautiful infographics. So please go there, check him out. So the first article that I want to talk about is actually a chapter in the book, the Handbook of Communication Training, which is a collection of essays written by primarily communication scholar practitioners who are members of the National Communication Association's Communication Training and Development Division. And what we're trying to do is establish a set of best practices within the discipline. Now, there's a really great chapters in here, so I highly recommend getting this book, especially if you're interested in communication training. And I have a link in the description to the Amazon page where you can purchase this. The particular chapter that I found interesting for this week is the communication skills of an effective trainer, written by Seth Fry and Stephen Beebe. Stephen Beebe is a well-recognized figure within the communication training and development field, has a variety of textbooks and so on, and they give pretty solid advice that I think intersects with emotional intelligence, cultural adaptation, and a variety of other topics that are covered in the building personal capabilities area. Now, in this chapter, they highlight some things that maybe for some seasoned professionals, it seems pretty basic, but are good reminders. And the first one is that you should use inclusive language when in training scenarios. So a good trainer, a good communicator, someone with good emotional intelligence is going to recognize that when trying to close the immediacy gap, so just as a reminder, immediacy is in 2 forms, verbal immediacy and nonverbal immediacy, and it's the idea of bringing together the trainer and the trainees, closing that psychological distance between them. So one tactic is to use inclusive language, such as we, our, and so on. So rather than saying, in this training, I am going to be talking about, you say, we are going to be talking about, and it just brings people closer together psychologically. The second is listening techniques, and they offer a table with a variety of techniques. As a reminder, relational and analytical are probably the most used in training scenarios. You don't want to be overly critical or too task oriented. Obviously, you need to correct when you need to correct, but a effective listener, effective trainer is someone that sort of leans towards the relational or affective, emotional sort of way of listening, or also listening for that sort of analytical and making sense of what people say so that you can repeat that back to them. The last point is to emphasize, particularly in facilitations, emphasize areas of agreement when there might be disagreement. Facilitation is to render easy, to make easier. That's what the definition in the Talent Development Book of Knowledge is, the ATD Book of Knowledge. And what you want to do is to really sort of say, oh, that's a really good point, and you're also making that point, especially if they're not saying things in exactly the same way. So the facilitator's job is to make it easier for the participants to sort of understand each other, which is a skill that you can learn over time. I just liked these points as good reminders about what it means to be an effective trainer. So the next article that I want to talk about is actually published in TD at Work. It's a 16-page article. If you are a full professional member of the Association for Talent Development, should be free to you. I highly recommend this one if you're studying this capability. What I liked about this one is the application of the project management area or skill to other aspects like instructional design. So there's a lot going on in this particular download. What they're saying is that you can use Agile or LLAMA as a ISD or project management approach and give you a series of steps in order to do that. For me, one of the things I really like, because it intersects with marketing, an area that I'm particularly interested in, is select a primary learner persona or PLP for your project. And that wasn't actually something that I was necessarily myself thinking about, but it makes sense because in marketing you want a buyer's persona, right? And this is a great way to be able to articulate to people what kind of individual we have on staff, for example, in the PLP scenario, and how are we best going to train them. So it's a sort of aggregate character of all of the various trainees, and this is just a very easy way to communicate to people what needs might be broadly. So really like that idea. Of course, there's the idea of iteration and so on, but let's go ahead and get into a few particular pieces of wisdom from this article. So the first thing is obviously what is Agile, and when I'm studying, I like to look for keywords and put those into my memory banks. So what I would be doing is reading this definition and thinking of things, okay, what are the keywords? And obviously flexibility stands out. This is a methodology that is going to be applied when you need maximum flexibility or you want to have flexibility. The next is that it's disciplined. So it's not just any flexibility, it's a very disciplined flexibility that is going to follow a particular approach or protocol around the specificity of whatever the project is. Also, it's going to be looking for only the most important changes. It's not going to maybe be looking at all changes that are needed. So that's an important point. And constantly fine-tuning is obviously a aspect of this that is important. So maybe it's a really good application of an iterative type of design process. So immediately I get that from it. And it's important to note that Agile actually is a methodology that comes out of IT. So the application of it is probably best suited for a learning and development adaptation, which is why we have lot-like Agile methodology approach. So you really get a good sense of the iterative application of LLAMA by looking at the ADDIE model here in this chart, which is actually in the article. And as you might know, or if you need a refresher, ADDIE stands for analysis, design, develop, implement, evaluate. And you can see that when you're using Agile, you're not following that very sequential step-by-step sort of approach. Obviously, because most newer methodologies, whether it's LLAMA or some other type, maybe it's SAM, for example, is just an application of ADDIE, because following a very linear approach to things is not always feasible in the real world application. But nevertheless, again, I'm looking for things that I think that add to my understanding of this information as I'm reading these kinds of articles, and a couple of things stood out to me. First off, the words or the idea that it has to have a definitive, clear start and end date is very important, I think. So that's something I want to remember as I'm studying, that if I'm going to be using Agile methodology, the project that I'm looking at has to have definitive start and stop dates. Because I could imagine a question on the exam asking or giving a scenario that does not have clear start and stop dates, and then I'm thinking, okay, which methodology might it be? And it's probably not going to be Agile or LLAMA. So that's something to keep in mind. The next thing is that it's not very good for help or support functions. It's really good for application to instructional design process. So those are some key takeaways that I got from this article. So if it's not really useful in terms of application to support roles, what is Agile perhaps good for? First off is content agility, learning agility, agile instructional design, as I mentioned, and project management. So there you have it, and I have the screen clipping from that article if you want to pause the video and take a closer look at it. So is this article worth expending your free downloads if you are a professional member, or is it worth purchasing? I actually think yes, especially if you're looking for something like a case study, and this article has a case study in it around the learning persona. So I really liked that about this because, as I mentioned, this is sort of a new idea to me, but makes sense from a marketing point of view, bringing in that. So I'm not a corporate trainer, so for me, sometimes I don't know what's actually going on in the field. So case studies are really valuable to me. So if you are approaching this examination perhaps as a faculty member, as I am, or you're approaching it from somebody that might not always be engaged in higher level decision making, then this might be useful. Maybe you're just doing instructional design, for example, and you're just given personas, but how do you actually use a methodology to develop that persona? Also, they give examples of how then to take that persona and apply it. They talk about chunking work effort and give examples for that. They talk about providing a work plan. They speak to the iterative nature of it. So this article covers all of that in about 16 pages. I do recommend this article. The final article that I just want to talk about is this one called The Nominal Group Technique, Applications for Training Needs Assessment. It's a bit of a dated article, but has some really valuable nuggets in it that I would just like to share. The key takeaways for me from this article is performing a needs assessment is recognized as a fundamental first step in the development of a training program. So just as a reminder that needs assessment sort of comes first, right? Analyze as part of that ADDIE model. But I really like this idea of taking what is typically thought of as a facilitation technique, nominal group technique, which if you're not really familiar with this, it basically involves this idea of treating everybody nominally, so as individuals, and you sit around a table, for example, and when you present a problem, you allow people to sketch out their lists of things sort of in silence. Because if you allow speaking to happen right away, then sometimes people are immediately muted. So this just gives you an opportunity for everybody to get their ideas down. And then you kind of go around the room in a round robin fashion where everybody shares their key highlights. You sort of rank order all of these. You try to avoid things like judgment and so forth so that you can come to good decisions. So this is an application of that process to actually and needs analysis. So they draw on McGee and Thayer's 1961 article that suggests that there are at least 3 levels to analysis. There's the organizational level, the operations level, and the personal level. And you can read what the details are of those on the screen, pausing the video to do so. So at the organizational level, what they sort of suggest is that you're trying to identify what training areas should be implemented. And they say that what's nice here is that you can examine the organizational factors such as goals and objectives to ensure a climate that is congruent, right, with the overall organizational needs. So again, when you ask people to provide their insights, you do that sort of nominally before you go and engage people maybe in a, this is what we're thinking, what are your thoughts, right? You get their thoughts first. They say that it's a really efficient method for extracting information from top-level managers. So that's a key thing to keep in mind, that this is a great way to kind of probe, if you will, the executives about the needs of the organization, aligning that perhaps to mission. They say that it's an excellent mechanism for involving top managers in program design. So this is just a way to get them involved in the instructional design process. They also talk about the operational level and suggest that it provides a thorough examination of how managers or supervisors are perceiving the actual duties of the jobs that are being performed based on actual environmental factors. So again, just soliciting that information through a nominal approach might be very valuable. And then they have this personal analysis saying that you can determine the traits and skills that are necessary for the types of people that you want to hire. So this has application to the HR function beyond just the training function. So I thought that was a good takeaway. Then they talk about whether or not this approach makes sense. So they apply an evaluation technique on the idea of nominal group technique being good for needs analysis. And I like this because, again, it just teaches you, as they're explaining things, what a good evaluation system might look like. So first off, they say that it is a good model based on an evaluation criteria of employee involvement. So if we believe employees should be involved in processes, this technique will do that. Management involvement. Does it get managers involved? We assume that it's good for managers to be involved in things. And again, yes, this model does that. This approach does that. So therefore, why not go ahead and adopt it? How much time does it take? They argue that this is quite efficient. So therefore, as an efficient approach to soliciting information, it's not going to be very costly. So therefore, it meets that criteria. So again, nominal group technique as a needs assessment, great choice. Relevancy and quantifiability. You can quantify data, and it also gets at what's most relevant to people, especially through that rank order function of the process. So again, they're saying yes, and again, tied to that time requirement is cost. They say this is a low cost option. Okay, so there you have it. If you happen to like this video, please give it a thumbs up as well as share it with others you think that might get some value from it. Hopefully I did not bore you or give you too much information, but I did highlight some resources you might want to download and take advantage of reading. I also provided my insight into it. If I said something that was unclear or inaccurate, please feel free to correct me or give me your insights on it. With that said, I hope that you will come back for future videos as I study for the CPTD, or also show up to watch other videos that I post on the topic of efficiency and effectiveness in your professional communication. So hit that subscribe button as well as the notification bell if you want to be sure not to miss any future uploads. I hope you have a great day.